There we go.
Okay.
I had to reboot it. Okay, so here we are. I'm Dan Prince.
And I'm Matt Heelan.
Nice to meet you, Matt.
Nice
Glad
to
to
meet you,
have you on.
Dan. Thanks.
Matt and I both work at a company called illumisoft. We are a custom software development company here in Kansas City. And my background is I've been in Kansas City since 1997. Worked at a number of companies here, including Cerner and DST and CSC. They're not based here, but they're based all over the place, basically. And I've been in software development, both in terms of coding, but also architecting, managing, and client relationships. So that's a little bit about me.
Right. And then about me. So I've spent I've been in Kansas City my entire life. And I spent about 15 years in small businesses, basically starting off with a legal technology company in 1995 and worked there for about 11 years. Spent some time also at Cerner and also spent some time in the finance industry for a brief period of time before I joined here at illumisoft. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, thanks. We will go deeper into who we are and why we're doing this going forward. But so let's talk about why are we doing a podcast now, and why do we think it's important? I'll start with you, Matt. Why do you think it's important to do a podcast? What's your take on this?
I think the main reason I think that we need to do this as a small business is because and especially even with COVID happening, it's such a good medium to really get to know who you're potentially going to be doing business with, right? And what I mean by get to know people, I think it's a good way to get to know who they are, who you're getting ready, what kind of values the person's going to be able to have when you start working with them. And I also think the reason why at least I listen to podcasts and why I think you do also, Dan, is because you want some education, right? You want to listen and get to know the people, and you want to understand what their expertise is, and maybe you can glean something from the podcast that helps you go out and maybe hire a software developer. Maybe it's not us, but at least you go in as an informed consumer, right? So I think that's what I hope the podcast is touching on those two areas. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what you think.
That's along the same lines.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I know this much about technology conversations. They are difficult to have because they are complex by nature. And when you're dealing with businesses, especially larger companies that are well established, their business processes and their business structure and business politics are also quite complex. And so this long form of communication works really well with those. And in the past, I have found myself in meetings with prospective clients where there just isn't enough time to explain the details that they need to understand what I'm trying to get across. And I've noticed that I often come away from those very critical conversations feeling like they're like I hadn't communicated well in the period of time that I had. Typically we'll schedule an hour meeting or something, and there just really isn't enough time to explain who we are and why we do what we do in that period of time. So I think doing a long form podcast where a conversational podcast, it's easy to consume. It's easy to get who we are out there in an authentic way. And hopefully going forward, once we develop some followers, it will be beneficial both to our clients and to other business entrepreneurs in the area to get on here and share what they know about business with the world too. And like you said, all I want to do is give back. I mean, that's why I started illumisoft, so that I could share what I know about software with people in a way that helps them do software projects more successfully for less money and more return on investment.
Well, I guess just to add on to that a little bit, I mean, one of the reasons why at least I joined illumisoft was because, there was this sort of, there's always been this sort of, and I don't know what maybe divide is the best way to describe it, a divide between small to medium-sized companies who want to use technology, but they're scared of the process. They're scared of how do I consume or go buy that, right? And so I think one of the great things that I noticed when I joined and got to know you a little bit better was some technical companies, when you work with them, they don't really do anything to demystify technology, right? And everything that I was, when I was interviewing with you, everything that I felt coming from you was, no, we want to pull back the curtain on technology and explain at a layperson's level what it is that we need to go build for you to help your business advance. And so I hope that as a part of the podcast, we're able to, I don't think we need to be getting into what an Azure DevOps board looks like, right?
Yeah.
How to use it, but getting into how to understand technology so you can easily consume it and not feel like you're being taken advantage of.
Right. And I completely and wholeheartedly hope that we accomplish that goal.
Right.
Because it's difficult as a technical person to realize where that boundary is between too technical and dumbing it down too far. And it takes communication with, the person you're trying to communicate it to actually figure out where that line is. Right. So yeah, I hope we're able to do that. And I hope this gives us enough time to really disseminate or to dissect complex issues, with respect to technical projects.
Right. Well, and
everybody can understand.
Well, and by now the listeners will understand from our brief explanation. Dan is the technical part of our company, and I've always been on the business operations, business development side of business. And so, I consider myself technical enough, but I think in my mind, what it makes it a good partnership is, and hopefully the people listening will pick up on this, is it's a good mixture of somebody who's very technical and somebody who's got a lot of experience in business, and we marry it together so that we give advice from both perspectives. So,
yeah. I hope that is true.
Yeah.
Going into this, I think there's a really high probability that we're going to need to refine our podcasting skills rather dramatically as we do it. But
everything's an iteration, Dan.
Right. You got to go into it with no fear. Right. So what we want to do from here is we want to talk a little bit more about who we are. We're going to dive deeper into our resumes and what we've done, and just to give everybody a chance to understand us a little better, who we are and how we explain our journey. And so, Matt, you want to start us off with that? Just kind of let's do a deep dive into who you are.
Okay. So it's kind of ironic. Last night, for some strange reason, I was Googling the CEO of the company that I started at, which was a company called RSI. I guess the story that I love to tell about my career is, I had gone to college mainly because I played baseball, right? I played baseball, and as a part-time side of that, I actually attended school. I didn't really take it seriously because I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player at some point. Obviously, by virtue of the fact that I'm standing here, that dream did not come true. But what happened was I got out of college and I looked around and I said, I got to find something I'm good at, and then I want to commit myself to. And I had a criminal justice background, but I kind of looked around, wasn't really attractive to me. And there was this position that was opened up to become an investigator, but it was for a privately held company. So I interviewed, and they were growing at the time. At the time I joined them, they were like 60 people. And within a year, we turned into about 120 people. And so what happened was, just as luck would have it, I joined at the right time. The company was expanding and growing rather quickly. So I went really from being kind of an investigator we offered legal services to law firms mainly. And the investigator was basically collecting information like medical records for large scale product liability cases. So think of like tobacco and diet drug litigation. All that was a function of gathering information, giving it to lawyers to be able to prepare their case, right? So I did that for like the first year, traveled all around the country. And then the company was growing so quickly that they said, Matt, you seem like you're a people-oriented person. How about you start managing people? So I had a small team. And then from there, really, that's where I kind of got the sort of leadership management kind of bug, and just started consuming everything I could to really get good at it. And it took me probably 7 years of trial and error of managing people and managing process and managing the company as it scaled, because it offered, just every day was like an MBA lesson in terms of, strategy, and in terms of how to manage, a group of people that were, 10 people into 20 people into 50 into 100, right? And one solution or one thing worked in one situation, but didn't work once we got bigger, right? So it just, every day was just, it was a human resource issue this day. The next day it was a sales issue the next day. And then there was the sort of, revenue, just running the company, right? And the company was owned by two brothers, Bob and Chuck Cash. And there was an interesting dynamic there too, working in a family-owned company. There was some, challenges for sure. But I worked there for about 10 years and got to be really close with Bob in particular. And then Bob one day sort of fired his whole sales staff because, again, the company's like a lot of small business. The company grew really big, but then it had to keep growing in order to sustain what we had built. And the project started to dry up, and the next month's work was not looking as good as the previous month's work, right? So, so he asked me to kind of be the business development nationally, which to me, I had never sold anything, in my opinion, up to that point. But he said, Matt, look, the business really well. You can talk about it. I trust you. So go out and, and help us find new projects. So I did that for about a year, generated, I think, a couple of $1 million in the first 6 months, and then landed what would have been the largest project in the company's history, which involved some work with the 9/11 Commission. So if you remember, all the people who did all the 9/11 cleanup work, they were all injured, physically, a lot of respiratory issues. And so all those people were suing someone, and it was part of like an insurance settlement, I think. So we were hired by the law firm to go collect all this medical information on all these people that were hurt.
Right.
And that's kind of, and again, the through story through all of my career has been, how do we use technology to as a part of that service, right? And there was a technology solution at the time. I think this was kind of at the beginning of online depositories, right, where we could store information, and we were moving away from delivering images on a CD to these people, right, and moving towards imaging the records and putting it on an online depository kind of stuff. So anyway, so they had agreed to move forward. It was going to be a $10 million project over the course of 5 years. And then they turned around and they settled the cases. So they settled the cases in in arbitration or something. So we didn't get to move forward, which was, it was about a year and a half worth of work from my perspective, just to get to that point. But then after that, I decided that it was time for me to kind of move on. The company, and we know a lot about this, Dan, is that, the company just did not want to continue to invest in technology. So as an example, this was at the very kind of forefront of the e-discovery business. Whenever we started collecting information from computers versus medical, hard copies of records or images.
E-discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I asked him if he wanted to either invest and buy a company that already had it built, or he wanted to go out and build his own mechanism. And he said no to both. So I kind of took that as a kind of a sign of the sort of the ability for the company to kind of grow. And I just kind of said, now's time for me to kind of move on. So,
yeah, that's a lot, but that's not your whole career, is it?
No, it's not. And then I left there. And then for some strange reason, which in retrospect seems like a dumb idea, but I decided I would go join one of the largest companies in Kansas City in Cerner. And so I felt, honestly, in retrospect, Cerner's a great company. I was there less than a year, but it just felt, for me, it felt like a fish out of water, right? I had gone from this like small little family company, right, to this giant monolithic sort of company. And unfortunately for me, I got to be a part of the first ever layoff at Cerner. And so it was difficult at the time, but in retrospect, it was probably a good thing. So, and then I jumped back into the legal services with a company out of Omaha called Focus, and kind of was there a couple of years trying to do like a rebuild job where their sales and their business had tanked in Kansas City, and they wanted somebody to come in and rebuild the business back up to where it previously had been. And then again, as luck would have it, they got bought. The company was sold to Mutual of Omaha. And so they got absorbed by Mutual of Omaha, and they just shut down a bunch of different offices all across the country. So, and then I also spent some time working as a consultant for a outsourced sales company called Connect 5000 with a friend of mine, Ray Rucker. And that was interesting. That was very challenging because it was part of that job was to work with a bunch of different types of companies and basically, trying to get them opportunities to get in front of. And the reason why it was interesting, especially in the context of what we do, Dan, is the whole purpose of Connect 5000 existing at all was all of their clients were technical companies. And basically what Ray learned over the years was that if you're a technical company, typically you don't like to do sales. You don't like to do, you don't like to be the, extrovert guy and go out and drum up new business and all that. So the purpose of the business was literally to address a weakness of one of the technical community, which is that they didn't like to sell. So all of our clients were all these small technical companies, maybe they did like, implementation of ERPs or CRMs or, whatever, but they got one good client, but they didn't want to go out and get any more. So they would give us a list of companies they wanted to get into. We would go, do email, phone call, whatever it was to set the appointments. And then basically it's nice because then all they had to do was come in and give their technical pitch, right? And then they didn't have to do all the work up to that point to get in the door. So it was, I liked it because it was every day was you were working with a different company and a different challenge. So.
And that sounds like something we could use.
Well, I don't know. I think, the interesting thing is at the time, the way they differentiated themselves was, or the way, Connect 5000 did was, this was, the decline of people taking in-person meetings, and email was much more the ways that we interacted with salespeople, and so they were distinguishing themselves by saying, no, we still believe in calling people and setting up appointments and all that. So, and now look where we are today, right? With COVID, you can't have an in-person meeting. Most people like you don't, have enough filters set on our emails that very few things get through, right? So yeah, it's an even more challenging environment right now. So then the last spot that I was at was a company called Cap West, which was also interesting because they used technology in another way, where they were one of the first companies in the country to automate the mortgage loan application process. So most, probably now 5-6 years ago, whenever anyone would apply for a loan, it literally involved a loan officer sitting at a computer on the phone with you, and they would fill it out in this real old legacy system that the entire mortgage industry is tied into, and they would just have to go take it over the phone, right? Well, now what Cap West was great at was they were able to put that application online. They were able to transmit it into the legacy system, and just really, from an efficiency perspective, really make it much more efficient to drive volume through, right? So I was there for a brief period of time. I guess it wasn't that brief. It was 5 years, but it felt brief. And then I kind of got connected with you. So, and that's kind of where we are today. So that's my big, long career in a nutshell.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I got some questions, though.
Yeah, sure.
Talk about your college career, your baseball. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, so that's kind of where the connection is with my father the most. Growing up from the moment I was 8 till I quit playing, I think when I was 24, that it just was a big part of my life, right? The best story out of that whole career was, I guess there's a bunch of good stories, but
it's been a good life, man.
Yeah, the one that sticks out the most is, I considered myself to be one of those people that had to work really hard just to be average, right? I mean, I had to be out there every day, being disciplined with practice and being in shape and everything. And so when I got to high school, I had been playing and was playing at a fairly high level by the time I got to high school. And then when I got to high school, the problem was the school that I went to, it was just a baseball. I mean, there were just a lot of kids who had a lot of really good experience. They were really talented. So I got to my freshman year and I made the team, but then I got cut my sophomore year, which you would have thought that something tragic really happened, which in retrospect, right, it wasn't really that big of a deal. But then I made the squad my junior and senior year, but in the total time I played in high school, I think I probably played in 5 games.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thought was for me that by the time I got out of high school, there was no way that I was going to continue to play at any other level, right? And my dad, being the eternal optimist and biggest cheerleader for me, he found an ad in the paper they were having tryouts at Maple Woods College, which is just a small community college. And I went up there, and I must have impressed somebody because they ended up giving me a full ride scholarship, and all of a sudden I was a college baseball player, which
that's cool.
Yeah, and my dad, the entire time, my dad's always, I can remember in high school throughout every time I would go to a game and I would sit on the bench the entire day, and then I'd get out. At the end of the game, I'd come back and get my dad's truck, and he would say, he would say, well, that kid that was playing third base in front of you, he was horrible. He made an error on that play, and you wouldn't have done that. You would have, And so he was always, he was always encouraging me, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but I mean, that sort of work ethic and sort of approach to, hard work paying off, just that stuff that my dad instilled in me. I mean, to this day, even in my job right now, there are things that that we encounter that I know that I don't understand, but I know that if I put in the hard work and I try to put in the work to understand it, that I can figure it out. Right. So it kind of is, it's all kind of connected. So anyway.
Sure it is. And that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because when we first met, you told me some of these stories and I thought those are impressive things. It tells about your character and who you are and how you formulated yourself, your actions. Tell me, you got any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I have an older sister, Teresa. She's got four. I've got three nephews and one niece. They're all in their 20s now, I think. So my parents are still alive, which is I don't know why I think that's impressive, but they are. They're 70. I think my dad and mom are 77 and 78. So
good.
Hopefully, good genes, right?
Yeah. Married with children?
Yes. My sister, you mean?
You.
Oh, me. Yes, I'm married. I
would assume your sister's married if you've got two nieces and a nephew.
There's a scientific way that could be done here.
Sure.
Yes, Jody is my wife, and Maddie is my daughter. She is getting ready to go to KU in August. Hopefully, cross our fingers, COVID doesn't rain on that parade. But yeah, I've been with Jody for over 10 years now, 12, yeah, maybe. But yeah, Jody and I actually met at RSI, the first company that I worked at. We were co-workers and didn't really didn't come together until later in our lives. But Jody's I don't even know how to describe my relationship with Jody. She is just the most unique, wonderful woman I've ever met. So
that's wonderful. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah. So is that all your questions?
Yeah, I thought that was a good overview.
Yeah. And I will say this, Dan, one thing I have done in the last couple of years that has been as meaningful to me as working at illumisoft has been the mentoring that I do at UMKC's business school through their e-scholars program. Just to connect to the past, when I was in college, I had called my mother up one day and I had said, I'm going to drop the degree that I'm pursuing and I want to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My sister's a teacher. I thought it's in the blood somehow.
Right. And
so she said, she's like, no, don't do that. You're never going to enjoy it. And I said, well, I think I might. And she's like, no. She's like, teachers don't make enough money and you like money. So, but that's what I get out of being a mentor, though, is being a mentor through the business school and also through another program. That feeds that itch that I have to sort of teach, right, what I know, pass on what I know, right. So I that's been I gotten a lot of satisfaction out of doing that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So are we gonna move on to your background, Dan?
Sure, we can talk about me a little bit because I know that it's important. I really don't like talking about me. I would classify myself as a high functioning introvert. To me, being introverted is that I've just developed patterns that help me not have to talk about myself, not have to engage with people because it is exhausting for me. And that's what I think the definition of introversion is, that it consumes my energy versus some people like you, Matt. I think it actually gives you energy to engage with people.
Yeah.
And I love people, so don't get me wrong, but it's just tiring. And over my life, I have built up these mechanisms to protect me from that. Like you mentioned, my email filters. So,
Well, it's a good thing we're doing a podcast, Dan.
well, it's not that I don't want to share who I am. It's that I just get exhausted sharing with everybody. So I'd rather do it in one place and do it here and do it in great detail. And so I don't have to do it a whole lot of more times.
Gotcha.
So that being said, I'll start with my high school career. I wrestled in high school. That was my favorite sport. I played football too, but that was more for my stepdad. Wrestling was the thing that I was best at because I had an older brother. He was a year and 2 weeks and 1 day older than me. And, if you couldn't wrestle or fight back, then you were going to get beat up. So I learned to wrestle pretty good and kickbox for what it's worth. And we didn't get to use kickboxing a whole lot at school, but I did a couple times, and that landed me some laps. When I was a junior, I was really good when I was a junior, but the year before I had really upset the coach. And I even forget how. I think it was because he was also my junior varsity football coach, and I was obnoxious. So I upset him in football, and when it got to wrestling, he would make me go out and run laps all during practice. I might get 20 minutes of practice in. He just couldn't stand the sight of me. So the good thing about that is that running those laps built up my endurance. And when I came back in my junior year, there wasn't anybody that could beat me. And I loved that year of my life with respect to sports. It was the only year that I was really good at it.
Right.
I consider myself fairly athletic. It's not something that has been a dream of mine. Nobody actually focused it, like your dad kind of helped you and gave you that direction and kept you focused on it even after your high school career ended.
Right. It was a short career, but
Yeah.
I mean to interrupt, Dan, but you didn't go to high school in Kansas City.
No, I grew up in California, Riverside,
Right.
California. Went to Norte Vista.
Right.
Norte Vista High School was one of 6 schools in the Riverside School District. It was the least affluent of the school in our neighborhood. But I loved my time there. It was a great experience. I did well in school, actually. At least I thought I did. I got along with all my teachers. They considered, I feel like they respected me and my intellect. Looking back at my report cards a few years back, I realized I didn't do all that well. I think I graduated with a 2.15 GPA.
Oh, well.
I did good in the classes I wanted to, and I didn't go to the classes I didn't want to. And so those F's added up. In fact, when I was getting ready to graduate, it was like a few months before graduation. I remember my mom taking me aside because she didn't want my stepdad to know because he was rather strict and forceful, and told me, look, you're going to fail if you don't do something. And so I went and negotiated with my geometry teacher to let me retake a couple tests. And luckily she was one of those teachers that, I got along with well. And so I was lucky enough to be able to retake them. And I got an A on them and graduated with a D+ in that class. So I made it through, and I feel like I did a good job, but looking back, maybe that was just my feeling. I did go to college. I had scholarships and enough student loans lined up, Pell Grants, actually, not student loans, because my parents wouldn't sign for any of those. But to go to Cal State Fullerton for 4 years. And I did the first semester there, and I felt like, I don't know, what it was, but I wasn't in a good place to attend college, and I didn't know why I was there. And I had some other challenges. So I quit. One of the reasons I quit was because my brother wrecked an airplane He had moved out to Oklahoma and he wrecked an airplane. And so I used that as an excuse to quit college and move out of my house and go and take care of my brother while he recovered.
When you say wrecked an airplane, what do you mean?
Well, he had bought an ultralight. It was basically a kite with an engine. And he bought it from a local motorcycle dealer. I won't say the name, but they took in used vehicles and used bikes and sold new ones. And then they'd put those used vehicles and bikes out on their lot. And that ultralight had sat there for quite a while, apparently, and they didn't realize. And, it was early in that type of flight machinery.
Right.
That nobody really knew, but the sun just baked those wings. And when he got up there, he was like 250 feet up and he made a turn and the wings ripped out. And so he fell into the woods, was in a coma for 6 months. And honestly, he never was the same after that. He didn't walk right. He didn't think right. And he remembered who he was before the accident, which just made it even worse. But
So then you moved to Oklahoma to live with him?
I moved to Oklahoma. He was in the hospital. So yeah,
Gotcha.
I actually did live with him in the hospital for like 3 months until he was able to come out, and nurses left me with his care. So I would feed him. I would help him get in the shower, and I would help him do all the things that he needed to do. And in exchange, I was sleeping on the couch there.
Oh, I got you.
Because I'd thrown all my stuff in my car, and it was all in my car in the parking lot.
So was your brother older?
Yeah, a year, 2 weeks,
okay.
and 1 day.
Gotcha.
I keep saying that, but this was a thing our whole life. I remember my first memory of Frank. I was about a year old, and I was sitting in a big old recliner. It might not have been that big. It felt really big to me at the time. And he had his arm around me and he told me it's going to be okay, little brother. And that was my relationship with him. And all the time, he always used to say, yep, we're a year, 2 weeks, and 1 day apart. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that? How long did you live in Oklahoma?
About a year and a half, 2 years. Came back to California, actually cut my thumb off working at my dad's steel shop, and I couldn't work, and I figured I'm going back to California, which I did. And I found a job traveling the country installing pneumatic conveying equipment for a company called Pacific Engineering, which that was a great job for me at age 20 to 22 because I got to travel everywhere and live in a hotel. They bought my food. I met a lot of people that I still have relationships with today. One of those people was my ex-wife and most of my kids' mother. Her name is Connie, and I met her in Alabama. Once I met her, I kind of got tired of traveling. And so took a job working locally in Riverside, California until the economy died in late 80s. And at that time, Connie and I were about to have our first child. But since the economy died, money was tight. And so we decided rather than paying $5,500 in Riverside, because we didn't have insurance, that wasn't even expected back then. Rather than paying $5,500 in Riverside, we decided let's move to Alabama, where you're from, and we can get it for $1,500.
Yeah.
So we did. And we kind of wanted to get out of California anyway, just because the school districts weren't that good. At least that's what we thought. And my oldest son from a prior engagement was just starting into kindergarten, and he was having troubles. And so we thought, let's move to the country. And so we got about 4 hours out of town, and she went into labor and had Tyler. In Barstow, California.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that actually turned out good because they saw my truck full of, my belongings wrapped up in cellophane to hold it on there. And they saw my car with a trailer on it, and they gave me pity, and they said, okay, we'll go down here and sign up for welfare, and which I did, paid for the birth of my child, right? And so all that money that I'd saved up, about $3,000, was now extra.
Right.
Yeah. So we went back to California for a minute, and then went ahead to Alabama.
Where at in Alabama?
A little town called Reeltown,
Oh, really?
Reel. Yeah, like the fishing reel.
Oh.
About halfway between Auburn and Montgomery.
Oh.
And we had some more kids. I worked for the highway department down there. I was the sign man. Yeah, they didn't care for me a whole lot just because I was a little OCD. He gave me a book and said, "This is how it's supposed to be, and by God, that's how it's going to be." Right.
So wait, it's just out of curiosity. So up to this point in your career, you haven't had a technical job yet. Is that right? Like technical from a programming coding perspective, right?
Yeah, no. Putting the conveying equipment together was quite technical, but it was all figured out for you. You just had to be able to read and understand the technical nature of it so that you could repeat it and put it together physically, from blueprints to actual implementation. But yeah, I didn't feel like I was technical or even intellectual. I kind of had staked my ground on I'm a college dropout, right? Because that's really the only experience I had. But working for the highway department in Alabama, one of the things, in fact, this was a turning point in my career, is they made us take classes on civil engineering, just 2 classes, which was just basic level civil engineering, which for me taught me trigonometry, which I hadn't learned in high school because, well, as I told you, I barely passed geometry. But as they're teaching me this, I just felt within me whelm up this love for learning again. And it's like, I guess I need to get back in school, because I just, learning how to calculate a slope and then determine, how long it's going to take something to get up that slope if it's moving at this speed. All those things were just, from my perspective today, simple math. But from my perspective then, like, this is beautiful stuff. I've got to absorb more of this. So that was a good thing.
So then did you go back to school then?
Well, I bought a computer from a pawn shop. It was a little 286. And I had used computers when I was a kid. My parents owned a deposition service. And at the height of that service, they bought 2 computers to help them transcribe and, do the work that they did. These are like $15,000 a piece, these computers. Very, very slow, 5.25-inch floppy disks. And there was a game that I played on there, which was basically go west or go east, open door type of Dungeons and Dragons game. But that was my experience with computers. But it was enough that, there's a desire there to continue to learn in there. And then when I bought the computer, when I worked for the highway department, it just consumed me. And I thought, at the same time, Connie got pregnant again. We had another baby. She got pregnant a 3rd time. It's like, I don't know how I'm going to afford this. And so it just all came together. And so I took the ACT test and called a college in Springfield, Missouri. We were also having trouble with my oldest in the Reeltown school district for the same reasons, right? I'm trying to raise him to be non-racist, and it's really hard to do in a racist environment. And and Alabama at that time was certainly that. I think everybody there didn't want to be racist, but as we're discovering in today's world, there's still racism that, we have yet to overcome. So I wanted to get out of there. I fell in love with computers. I knew I was going to have to go back to school to be able to afford my family. And I said, where do I want to do that? My mom and grandma and everybody lived in Springfield, Missouri. So that's where I went. To Southwest Missouri State.
Oh, right. Now it's something else, but
yeah, it's University of Missouri at Springfield.
Right. Yeah, or something like that.
So this is getting rather lengthy. So I went to school for 4 years, got a computer science degree, graduated summa cum laude with a 3.97 GPA. And I'm only mentioning that because comparing that to my high school transcript is a massive difference. Took a job at Cerner straight out of school and worked there for 3 years and realized that my non-traditional student status, I was 8 years older than everybody else, put me in a really good position at Cerner because Cerner hires hires high GPA people, but hires them straight out of college and they're young and inexperienced for the most part. And I happened to be less inexperienced because I had ran construction crews and things like that. So
out of curiosity again, what year was this?
I took my job at Cerner at the end of 1997.
Gotcha.
So I stayed there until October 2000. Yeah, October 2000.
What size were they when you joined?
I was associate number 3352. No, 3322. Yeah, one of those. But yeah,
gotcha.
Relatively small. And I felt like my number was way bigger than all of the people that I was around. So now they're up in the 40,000s, 50,000s.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Crazy.
So what you were in the original headquarters in North Kansas City?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I forget what the number of the building was, but they built so many more buildings now that it doesn't matter. You
were hired as a what?
I was hired as a software developer.
Okay.
And the group that I was in was called IQ Health. And I enjoyed it because it was not Cerner. Cerner, they had spun off this new group and they were populating it with people like me to try and create an electronic medical record that was patient centric. So it would be patient owned electronic medical record. And I thought it was awesome. We did that for 3 years. We had 3 to 4 different versions of it, but none of them ever got implemented at any clients ever. And so at some point I became really frustrated because we worked so hard, and Cerner at the time, Neil Patterson really liked to drive managers. I started off as a developer, and then I went to a lead developer, and then I went to a development manager, all within about a year and a half, because I just had 8 years experience on people. And so that was a good position. But I would get these emails from Neil Patterson saying, your people aren't getting enough hours, right? Work them harder. And so we did work really hard, and we put out a lot of put that result out there, and it never got implemented, and that was rather frustrating. So yeah, I became frustrated with not being able to produce the results. At that time, I feel, in retrospect, I was really young and I wanted to accomplish some great things, and by God, this was an opportunity to do it, but because sales wasn't able to get it into a client's hands, I felt a little, stifled. And so I started looking for a job, and Midwest Consulting Group hired me. They put me in an interview with DST and doing some dynamic HTML, some advanced stuff at the time. And they liked me and they wanted to hire me. And by the time that I got the offer from MCG, I had kind of changed my thinking. It's like, I put 3 years into this. I should stick it out. I love these people that I'm working with. I've got, some really good teams and some good people. And I was just a little frustrated, right? And then MCG, Midwest Consulting Group, got me on the phone. I said, yeah, I think I'm not going to take it. And they said, look, name your price. And so I did. I named it really high, and they said, no problem. So then I'm kind of stuck. And at that point, I couldn't go home to the wife and tell them, yeah, I just turned down an extra $50,000. So went to work at DST and left Cerner as a result. And then I was at DST for a couple of years, and Cerner hired me back as a contractor through MCG. And all of that was a great experience. I helped them build out a sales calculation tool. How much is it going to cost? What products do you need? It was a very complicated sales tool that worked exactly as they envisioned it. But unfortunately, it never got implemented because it was really just one VP trying to prove another VP that it couldn't be done.
Hmm.
And somebody won, somebody lost, but they never used it. So ridiculous. But that's kind of the Cerner culture, right? You've got really young people and you put them in management positions and pretty soon in VP positions, and they just don't have the business acumen to do the things.
Right. So at the time, they just weren't investing as much in educating people who were advancing.
No, they still don't, as far as I know. Do they?
I haven't, I don't know anybody that works there anymore to know what the culture is like. I know when I was there, that was the era of everybody walking around the building had a crucial conversations book, right?
Yeah.
That's how that's how a lot of those big organizations think they're teaching, right? They just buy everybody a book and then immediately think it's going to be transmuted into their organization, which.
So when was the last time you were there?
So what year was that, Dan? It's been over 10 years, probably.
I was there in 2013 for about 8 months. Again, on the business side, the consulting side. But they wanted me to come in there and build them a team to do basically drag and drop configuration type of thing. And so we picked a JavaScript package and built on top of it. And about 7 months, it was pretty much done. And they were kind of balking on re-signing the contract for the next year. The company that I was working for assured me that it was going to be signed, but I had a couple other offers, and so I jumped ship and went to Epic Systems. And Epic Systems is where I started illumisoft at. So that's Epic Systems does e-discovery and case management for like Chapter 13 and stuff like that.
Right. So when you were because DST has always been, DST was a Kansas City started company, right?
Right.
And so at the time that you were at DST, was it large or small or?
It was pretty big. I think 23,000 people at the time. It was too big. Yeah. I threatened, I don't know what the right word is. I wanted to leave there about 5 out of the 8 years that I was there.
Right.
But I was going through a divorce and I was just challenged outside of company, and I just kind of clung to it. They let me go in 2010. They let a bunch of us go. It was a layoff. But man, that was a good experience for me. I'm so happy that they did because it reminded me of who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. And I had kind of become complacent and
Right.
I don't know.
But like I was
asleep.
Like I was telling you, I mean, I kind of felt like smaller had all these advantages, right? You could one day be doing this, the next day you could be doing a different. So at this point, though, you've worked for some pretty large corporations at this stage in your career. So which isn't unheard of, obviously, but people working in large companies to then turn around and go start their own business or open their own smaller company. I mean, that seems like if you're like me, a little bit more risk averse, when going from a big company to starting your own thing. I mean, did you feel that was an easier thing for you to do?
It's funny because I think even though I was in a big company, I felt like my teams were always small. Like I worked for CSC in between being laid off from DST and getting hired on to Cerner again. CSC, Computer Science Corporation, they have projects all over the world. And this particular project was in Leavenworth, working for Fort Leavenworth for, the documents, TRADOCs, they called it. But the team was only 6 people. And they hired me in there as, I think, a web developer doing some specific technology. But when I went in there, 5 people are all working separately to accomplish the same goal, none of them talking with each other, none of them really collaborating at all. And the project manager on the Army side was rather disappointed in the performance, and he tended to let everybody know that. And so I don't know what led me to take on the challenge, but I felt like I need to fix this, right? So I got the team together and I said, guys, let's work together and get this done. And if you do this and you do that and we do this, we'll make the client happy. And they were reluctant because they didn't think that he could be happy. But nevertheless, I talked them into letting me be that voice between the client and the team, which they hadn't had before. He was interacting with each of them directly in a way that maybe wouldn't have been very motivating to some people.
Right.
But I put myself in that position, and I engaged with the client, with the Army representative, and we ended up over the next 8 months, which was the remainder of the project, actually producing the results that he had wanted for the 2.5 years prior to that. So I felt I was empowered by it, just personally. And they all said, "Hey, great job, Dan, good." But just personally, I felt like I had discovered something within me that didn't require a big company. And in the past, I was aiming for big companies because they pay better. There's more security. There's more room to move around and to take advantage of the resources that are within a big company. But what I found during that experience was that I didn't need that big company to find those resources. And in fact, it might be that they're stifling me because there's a lot of voices in a big company and you tend to get drowned out.
Right.
Drowned out, not drowned.
So did you, but then what year did you start at illumisoft?
I started illumisoft in 2014. So at the end of 2013, I went to Epic Systems. And I was there about 6 months, and I got a call from a guy who had found me on LinkedIn. And he was the CEO of a company that was owned by a Chinese entrepreneur. And he wanted me to check out a project that he had already had going. And apparently they had had it going for 4 to 5 months, and they didn't know if they could trust the developer that they had paid. And so they wanted me to look at it. And I told them, no, thanks. I got a job. I'm not looking to do anything on the side. And then he called me back a few days later, sounded a little bit more desperate. And I also said no. I said, look, if it really means something to you, I can find somebody that you can work with that, is interested in taking this on. But through that conversation, I decided, look, I'll help you out, but I'm not going to bill you. I'm not going to sign a contract. Let me help you out and you'll stop bugging me. And so that's what I did. He wanted me to check with this company and get a hold of him and find out where they were at on development. And what I found was that the company really was just a guy that was a business analyst that worked for another company. He was a technical business analyst, and he had hired a kid out of high school to write this code for him. And I got the kid on the phone. And he's a really bright kid, but he did not have a clue how to build a system, right? He knew he had written maybe a web page, maybe put some code behind that web page to make it do something, but a system it was not. And so he was really stuck. And I got him on the phone and I helped him figure out a couple things, but then I realized that he really had very little done, and what he needed help with was everything else. And so I reported back to the guy. I said, look, you've wasted your money. I would suggest stop putting it there. I later found out that that's fairly common. When somebody comes to you as a contractor and you say, go check on that other contractor, it's very seldom that the new contractor will say the old contractor's doing fine.
Right.
Because they want that business. And even though that wasn't my intent, that is what happened. So when I told them that their money was going down the drain, They didn't have anything built. They were not ready to deliver, which was what the guy kept telling them. Look, we'll have this to you in a week. They were 99% not there.
Oh.
So
Well, what was the thing though? What was the thing that he was building?
So what he wanted to build was basically a fulfillment system for online shops like Amazon, eBay, Shopify, etc. What he contracted with me to build for him was just that. I set up a web page, and I would let his clients come and sign into that web page and build an account and put money in their account, virtual bank account, if you will. We would connect their eBay and their Amazon stores through OAuth. And whenever somebody came to their Amazon page or eBay page and bought something, we would capture that information and we would tell his warehouse to go ahead and send those products. Then we would send emails out to both the owner of the product of the store and to the person that bought the product, tell them what their tracking number was, when it was going to be there, all that stuff. And that worked pretty good. It took us about 1.5 years to build that, but so that was the beginning of illumisoft. And during that time, I was making a pretty good grip of money. Right, I was both working full-time as a software developer at Epic Systems, but also I had about 10 to 12 people working for me that I was billing the client for. And I was making like $20 an hour, not a whole lot. I was paying my people good and just taking a very small percentage off the top. But these people that I had hired to do this work were also people that I worked with at Epic Systems. They weren't people that worked for me at Epic Systems, i.e. they weren't in my direct report tree, but they were other people that I respected their work, and they were pretty good, and they had the skill set that I needed, so I hired them on. And Epic Systems had a policy that allowed for that. Actually, they allowed for everybody to work side jobs if they wanted to, but I don't think they'd ever considered somebody like me coming in there and actually giving people side jobs while I was a manager. And I didn't really consider it either. I thought, well, everybody can work side jobs, so why don't I give them to them? And about 1 year later, they realized that they were at risk, and they asked me to stop doing it, right? Because, and I hadn't really thought about it, but if the client had said, here's another $2 million, I want you to speed it up, I might have quit my job and tried to take all those developers with me.
Right.
So, I feel like I want to have integrity. And that was a moment where I decided, this is what I want to do. I want to continue to build out this product, and I want to continue to build my business. And I don't want to leave a bad taste in this company's mouth who hired me 1 year earlier. So I'll just go it alone. So I still had those people working for me, but I quit Epic Systems and started just doing illumisoft by itself. And that went great for about a month. So I quit Epic Systems in May of 2015, and it was about a month later that the client pulled the plug on the project. Yeah. He had run into some financial difficulties with his other company, and for whatever reason decided, I'm just going to shelf this for now.
So within a month of being an entrepreneur, you get the realization of what it's really like. Right?
Yeah, a month of depending on that entrepreneur, that income. Luckily, though, he owed me like $150,000 that he was going to pay me over time. So we stayed engaged with him. We would do, $2,000 to $5,000 worth of work each month, and then he'd also pay me my, a stipend towards, or some amount towards what he owed me.
Right.
So it lasted, but immediately the challenge it became not how do I manage this business that that I have coming in while I keep my job, to how do I grow this business? Because otherwise I've got to shut it down and get a job.
Right.
So very tumultuous
Motivated.
time.
Well, it was motivating, right? I mean, the number of people who are entrepreneurs and maybe not solely motivated, but are motivated by the idea of going back to work for somebody else is enough to get you out of bed, right? And getting you trying to figure out how to figure it out. So
yeah, absolutely.
So then, when did you formally hire employees for illumisoft?
So that would be about 2 months before I quit Epic Systems. I hired
Okay.
my first full-time associate. And that's actually what triggered the whole thing. One of the guys that I had working for me at Epic Systems decided to quit Epic Systems. And then I hired him. And somehow that got back to HR and they asked questions. And so I was completely honest. I said, no, he quit. He didn't quit because I was hiring him. He quit. And 2 weeks later, he said, hey, I would like to work for you full time. And so I said, well, okay. Right.
So employee number one.
Employee number one was Dustin Ewan, who later became a business partner.
Right. But how quickly did you guys bring on the rest of what was, people in that? What year was that? 2015?
Yeah, 2015. No, we kind of struggled through 2015. We got a project working staff aug. And so Dustin went in there and worked at a company called Medtronics down in Overland Park.
Yeah.
And apparently they had a messed up system, and he went in there and straightened it all out for them. And about a year of that, he was just exhausted. Apparently the environment was very toxic and emotionally draining for him. And so we finally walked away from it. But not before we signed a contract, or not a contract, but a service agreement with Children's Mercy. So interesting story. In my project, when I worked at Cerner back in 2001, after I went to DST, I hired one of the guys that I hired to build out this team was a guy named Moose, also known as Brian Rivera. He is now the director of the Research Institute at Children's Mercy. And we had worked together 20 years earlier and stayed in touch over LinkedIn, but I always had respected the degree of intelligence and ability that he brought to the table when I met him. I don't think he had a college degree at the time, which wasn't something I was looking for anyway. I just wanted somebody that could get in there and do the work. And I already knew what I had architected and what I needed done. So he fit the bill, but just so far surpassed it as well. And he and I got along really fine. I think he respected my work as well. And so that's why we maintained a professional relationship. And at some point I had reached out to him about illumisoft and said, I'd love to get into Children's Mercy and see what we can do to help you guys, either in automating your DevOps or helping bring some of your projects up to a modern architecture or any of those things. And through that effort with him, and I found out that they had a project, and I bid for it and was able to get in the door there, and that went well. Right. That was late 2016 that we actually got that inked, that contract.
So was the inking of Children's Mercy as a client, was that the spark of hiring more people at that point?
Yeah, yes and no. It wasn't that particular job because that relatively small but long term. It just so happened that we moved into WeWork, and we were just focusing all our time on this thing coming off of the Medtronics project. I partnered with Dustin. I said, let's partner together. We will we'll build out our website, and we'll build out our marketing team, and we'll get more business. And that worked. We got a big client up in St. Joe. We got a client in Lee's Summit. We found another client in California that wanted to build out a medical piece of medical software.
But at this stage, there is no sales effort going on. This is just word of mouth.
Correct. Well, I did have a salesperson, but he wasn't producing anything. I didn't really know what to tell him to go do, and he didn't ultimately didn't figure it out. He was trying, but
So, like as an example, the St. Joe client, that was like word of mouth.
he actually called me. So,
So
he said I was the only person that answered the phone. He had called 4 companies, the Nerdery, VML. He called several companies, and nobody gave him the time of day, and I answered the phone, and so we got the gig. That was about a $500,000 year from that client.
So at this point, a lot of the clients you're finding are just Googling software development and then
Right. Yep, they're finding us. All of my clients, though, it seems, found us and chose us because of the, authenticity of our engagement with them.
Right. Right. So then you got Children's Mercy. You're bringing on more clients at this stage. Everything's going gangbusters, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. We got out of WeWork. We were up to about 10 to 12 people, and WeWork was getting really expensive for very little space. And so we signed a lease and got this space that I'm sitting in now.
But at any point, Dan, I felt this way when I first worked at RSI. Now I wasn't even an owner, but sometimes I feel like small business owners, when the thing starts to grow, they kind of wake up in the middle of the night with all of us like night sweats of saying, "Oh my God, what have I created? Like, this is an actual company. There are people dependent upon." I mean, did the realization of all that ever overwhelm you at all?
Not until mid 2017, maybe mid 2018. So in 2017, we were growing. We moved into the office. We were hiring. Projects were going gangbusters, making payroll. Everything was good. But then we had a number of those projects that came to an abrupt stop. One of them because we were finished, another one because we were almost finished and the client decided good enough. And so all of a sudden I found myself in a position where I had more associates than I did work, and I had to lay off some people, including 2 of my sons. And so that's when I realized that it had grown into something that I was personally responsible for other people's well-being. Right. And it is night sweats. It's terrifying when you think I'm not going to be able to pay them, and I'm going to have to go to work and tell them, guys, you're going to have to wait a day. Because I know everybody needs the money. They need their check. That's why they're working. So,
but it's interesting to me that and I guess maybe it's not that interesting in that, hey, this entrepreneur thing seems pretty easy, right? I quit my job at Epic, and I have a whole stable of clients coming to me wanting to do work with me. So, they always say that people who are entrepreneurs, that it's the first 5 years, right? If you can make it through the first 5 years, then typically it's not smooth sailing by any means, but the first 5 years is going to test you and whether or not you're really cut out to be an entrepreneur. And it sounds like you were like right in that window, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could have failed very easily. We could have failed prior to that too. So what I heard was that like 90% or 80% of the businesses fell within the first 3 years, and then 80% of them fell within the first 5 years. Right. 80% of those fell within the first 5 years. So just the fact that we've been alive since 2014 makes me feel somewhat accomplished. I wish we were more alive, right? Bigger. But at the same time, what I've come to appreciate about doing business now, which is kind of what we wanted to move to next, is why I started illumisoft, and then maybe to what our perspective is. But what I wanted to do when I started this business wasn't to make a lot of money or to have the biggest business in town. And I admit that after starting the company, those things became appealing to me, more from an ego perspective. But I just also think that, if you can build it, then that means you're doing something right. Right. If you don't have every person that's building software coming to you, then you have some improvement that you can do to accomplish that, either in sales or marketing or, SEO or your web page, or maybe just personally and how you communicate your value.
That's I guess one of the things we wanted to talk about, which is that, look, I mean, we can't throw a rock in Kansas City or most other cities without hitting a software developer, right?
Right.
It's all the idea of distinguishing yourself from everybody else. I think it's kind of one of the things that is hard to do, right?
It's hard to communicate. It's not hard to do. And I'll tell you, I'll break it down for you, right? Experience is everything, right? Because that's how developers, that's how they grow in their career. They're asked to do something that they're not capable of doing, and they learn how to do it. Right. That's called experience. I have 25 years of experience. You can't replace 25 years of experience except with at least 12 years of experience, right? Even if I suck and I'm slow, right?
Right.
You still got to have 12 years experience. And the number of developers is doubling at a pace at which you could say the majority of developers out there do not have the required experience. However, they do have enough experience to get out there and sell themselves. So,
right. I remember when I first started with illumisoft, I think very soon thereafter, we started doing interviews with developers. And I freely admit, I had probably up to that point never interviewed somebody that technical before. And I could just remember these were interviews maybe that some you were in, some you weren't. And I would walk out of there and I would say, man, that guy was really impressive. And then we would come back for a second interview, and then you would be in there and you would start to, just ask some very pointed questions about what they knew and what they understood. And by the end of the interview, I'm like, well, this guy's terrible, right? Because you had kind of, as people that have the knowledge that you have, kind of, get to dig into what these people really do know. And, we hear all the time, imposter syndrome and, all that kind of stuff. So, but I think, and this is getting off on a different subject, maybe we can talk about this maybe at a different podcast, but it has to do with like the ease of access, right? It's the ease of access for people to become a developer. I mean, you go to like a boot camp for 2 days, right? Or you go to some other program, right? And then they hail you with a certificate afterwards saying you are an expert. And then they show up on our doorstep and they think that they know a lot when we find out that really they don't know as much as what we require, right?
And they do know a lot. Their journey has been the same as my journey. It's just mine's been longer, right? It's been fuller. And so I'm not saying they're intentionally going out and selling themselves when they don't have the ability to deliver, but they are doing that, right? Naively.
Right.
And I say they. Everybody, like you said, you can't throw a rock in Kansas City or most other cities without hitting a software development agency like mine.
Right.
And even, when I get online and do a search on Google Maps, like software development near me, there's new ones every day that I'm finding.
Right.
And that's fine because it's evidence that there is a lot of work out there yet to be done. And personally, I think there's a lot of work in healthcare that needs to be done. And that's where I'd like to focus our efforts.
Right.
And that's kind of why I started illumisoft, because I saw too many projects cost way too much money, deliver way too little value, and people would leave those projects just bitter and unhappy, and they would talk about the other members in there. And there's a better way to build software, and it really requires you to have a good team that has a good relationship, to have a good relationship with the client, and all of that requires a certain personality, a certain engagement style.
Right. So is it? But I mean, let's say you're a layperson who wants technology to help them solve their problem, become more efficient, whatever the thing is, right? The myth that exists, I think, for a lot of people who are not in the business, is that I don't understand what I'm paying you to go build me. I just know I need you to go build it for me. But it's so daunting and so intimidating, I can't even pull the trigger, right? I don't even know how to have a conversation with you because I'm not a technician. I know what I need to have built. I know what will help my company, but I don't feel confident signing on the dotted line because I don't feel comfortable that I'm going to get taken advantage of because there's all these horror stories out there of this guy spent this much money and didn't get what he wanted, right? So how do we bridge the divide between the myth that is or is not true and how to engage with a company, whether it's us or anybody else in software development without just feeling like you're stuck, right?
Right. Well, so there's two things about that. The first one is when people come to me, they may or may not be able to articulate what they want, right? So, and even if they can, the chances that what they need and what they want align are still in question. So I've had people come to me and say, I need you to integrate with this system so that I can do this or that. And when I look at what they actually have, I just tell them, no, you don't need to integrate. Maybe you just need to pull the data that you have into the right place. So my point is that you're right. People come to me and they don't know how to gauge the value of what I'm giving them, right? They don't know how to pull the trigger. So there's two of those types of people, those that don't think they'll ever know. And then they go about hiring somebody to do it for them. They abdicate that responsibility and they just go on gut feeling, right? How do they feel about this guy or that guy? And they add in a little bit of, well, this guy's more expensive than that one. And either they feel good about it or they don't feel good about it and they go this way or that way. But it's all just gut check feelings.
Right.
And those that I really enjoy doing business with and really can feel like I can provide value to them are those that want to allow me to help them to dig into the problem and together come up with the right solution. But in order to do that, they have to be willing to understand, everything about it. And when I say everything, I don't mean the modules, how we're going to put the code together. And so therein lies the artistic part, right? How do I look at somebody and explain complex details at a level that they can get it and be able to process it and use it to make decisions?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, this goes back to one of the criticisms that I've had. I've only been in this particular industry for a year and a half, but, this idea that, that just give me your money, but I'm not going to take the time to educate you. Right. That it's all smoke and mirrors, what we do. Right. That I'm just going to write you a blank check and you shouldn't ask any questions. And, you shouldn't try to, I don't ever think our clients want to know the technical level that you're talking about, but they got to know enough to say, I'm spending this money and this is what I understand I'm going to get for it. Right.
Right.
And so one other thing you said that made me think of, we talked earlier about the uniqueness, amongst the many different options that people have for software development. And I do think that it does come down to, ironically enough, a human factor, right? Which is trust, right? It's the idea of how you build trust with people. And a lot of times it's over time, but in some cases you have to build trust with people rather quickly, right? Based on the need that they have for their project. So if they've got a short timeline, we got to figure out how to build trust relatively quickly. And quite frankly, is one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is, trying to understand who you're dealing with in business, right, is a great way to build trust with people, right? So
right, being good people,
right.
First of all, having integrity, having the right motivation. You got to have that as a foundation, and then being able to communicate it to people. And I think that's where maybe I think this is going to help. The podcast is definitely going to help, but that's where I have fallen short in the past is not that I haven't tried, but that it takes me a long time to articulate these kinds of ideas and concepts in a way that people will see I'm completely and totally authentic. So that's why I appreciate this long form type of podcast. Right. So that is enough about me. Yes. Thank you, Matt, for asking those questions and digging into the details a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that I've always been interested in is, the motivation that people have for wanting to start a new business, right? Because the thing is that it's not like, and maybe it's been a while since I've been in college, it's not like you get to the end of your college years or studying, or even quite frankly, at the end of your high school years. And somebody says to you, here are some options. You can go work for someone. You can, it always seems like the assumption is that we're in our careers, we're always going to go work for someone, right? But it's not always just a natural option that people think, you know what? I could just go start my own company, right? Not everyone thinks in those terms. So it's always fascinating to me when somebody says, oh, well, yeah, I could just go open up a company and I'll just start doing all this stuff myself, right? So I always like to hear I know you don't like to talk about yourself, but I just like to hear people's journey that they went through just to get to the point where they said, I'm going to step off the ledge here and go do this thing. So.
Well, I got to tell you, I was kind of goaded into it. self-goaded, because my dad owned a business, only he worked for my uncle Corky for a long time. And he worked for another business owner for a long time. And he managed their steel fabrication stuff. But it wasn't until he was, I think, 43 or 44 before he decided I can do this myself. Mm-hmm. I know he was extremely valuable to the people that he worked for in the past. But he never took the time or effort, I guess, to build his own until right before he died. He died at 45. So
that's interesting, though, Dan. So to you, maybe it wasn't such a leap, right? Because you watched your dad say he could go do it, right? So for you to make the jump on your own may not have seemed as risky or as.
I got to say, I had it pretty easily. I mean, yeah. I was pretty lucky. I admit that. I mean, how many people have somebody call them on LinkedIn, turn them down, and end up with $1.3 million project.
Right.
So yeah, I realized that I was, it's enough. It feels really good to have that, right. I guess, privilege.
Yeah.
But it also was a lot of responsibility, and I felt like, shit, I'm just pissing this away. I've been given this huge gift, and it's like,
right.
So,
right.
So yeah. And at the time that I was both working at Epic and doing this work, my son was also trying to build a business. He had been fired from or laid off from a union job that he was working at, and decided, I don't really want to work for somebody else anymore. And luckily he had that mentality that you're talking about is so rare that right. I'll just start my own business. And
right.
When I saw him doing that, and he was making it, albeit, not eating really well while he's doing it, it really made me look at my position, and I felt a little ashamed that I wasn't doing more with what I had. And so.
Yeah. For me, outside of, Cerner and some of the other places that I've been, I tell people all the time, I practically grew up at RSI, right? I grew up there, and I kind of got this unofficial business degree, just in the sort of it takes to bootstrap a company on your own kind of stuff. And I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for people who go out and do it on their own, right? Because it's running your own small business and growing it is a it's a big challenge. So
It's huge. It's even hard to explain what those challenges are because there's just so many of them, and none of them are that huge.
right.
But they are. It's overwhelming.
Right.
And I feel like I was extremely lucky because I didn't, like most people, like Tyler. He had like he had 2 weeks of pay coming in, and that's what he started his business with.
Yeah.
Right. And as I said, I had a job when my business started. And then when I finally quit that job, I still had $100 and something thousand owed to me. I had it easy.
Right.
And even with that level of ease, I've managed to struggle enough where I've learned some of these lessons.
Right. Yeah. Well, and maybe in a, at some point, maybe we'll be able to introduce, like we talked about earlier at the beginning. I'm interested in hearing other people's stories, right, about how they made the decision to start their own business, and what tricks or tips they can offer us, right, to learn more from other people that have maybe we're here in our journey, but they're a little bit further along and they've learned some things they can share with us, and quite frankly, share with other people. I think, unfortunately, unless you're in a network of people or you're in a group or something, if you're a small business owner, finding just other resources to help you deal with this problem or that problem, oftentimes you kind of feel like you're out there on your own, right? Where you don't really know where to get help, right? Especially the free kind, right? And so hopefully maybe part of the purpose of the podcast will be that people can, have another resource to go hear about, like your story or your Tyler's story, and say, oh, I see what they did. They switched to this or made this, or, whatever. And because, and a lot of people, quite frankly, from my perspective, I know Bob, the owner of RSI, he was a big ego guy, right? He wasn't going to go sit in a room full of other business owners and tell them all the stuff that he was struggling about, right? He had way too much pride to do that. But sometimes when you hear other people going through the same things and how they solved it, got out of it, that and if they can do that in a safe way, then then they can get better at running their company, right?
Right. It's less fearful, or there's less reason to be afraid when you do it because you already know, well, they've done it and they did this, they did it, they did that. Yeah, it's super helpful to have that kind of insight. And I think that we are on the precipice of a change where we're going to start getting the majority of the things that we learn from people instead of from media and from somebody that just distills the information for us. We're going to have to go out and get it ourselves and find the people to listen to and the people to follow. And I hope that what we talk about here will provide value for people.
And and again, just, I think, some podcasts always have this sort of like these topics that are always sort of week to week. And I'm sure we'll get to that point, but I do know this. I know that where technology is headed is obviously a big thing that you follow and that you pay attention to. But also, I think, one of the things we talked about today is the topic of education, right? I know you're something that's near and dear to your heart is just how we educate young people in this country. Yep. And I know we have a whole podcast to talk about that. And I know, ironically, my family's background was all in education too, so it's an important thing to me. But I think that those are, again, like we talked about, that we, in some cases we're like, there is no topic that we want to avoid during the podcast, but yet all these topics that we talk about, education, where technology's headed, it all works its way back into running a small business, right?
It does. And everything and every experience that we've had also plays into it. So let's take a quick break. I've got some calls that I need to answer real quick, and then we'll jump back on here and finish up.
Okay. So we had a conversation about client services and how we could make our service better and everything. And at one point, you wrote up on the whiteboard in the conference room that there were three types of values that you wanted. They were all C, remember?
Mm-hmm.
They were, I can't remember what they were though. Do you recall?
No, but communication was one of them. Consistency, I think, was one of them. And the third one was rather,
We could call it collaboration.
yeah. Yeah,
No,
could be. Maybe that was communication.
Yeah. What I'm getting at is that, when we communicate our unique perspective, that's the kind of stuff that, again, that we're trying to do every time we engage with you, right? We're trying to be good communicators. We're trying to be collaborative in how we deal with you. We're trying to deliver a consistent product, whatever. I mean, that's what I mean when we talk to people about our unique perspective. I think that's what a lot of it is. So
I do agree that I tried to boil that down into three words, and I don't know, it's kind of contrived if you do, but we could talk about what we really believe, right? Is that there's a way that you do business, and it's the kind of way that makes you feel good when you're done. It's the kind of way that, the people that you did business with make, feel good about, right? Because it's honest, it's authentic, it's engaging. We genuinely care about our clients and their success, and we hurt if we can't achieve that. So those are the kinds of things I think we can use in lieu of the 3 C's. I mean, you can if you can find that document. I think it's in the sales document.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see what I can dig up.
So far in this podcast, we wanted to accomplish several things. We wanted to introduce ourselves. We wanted to kind of explain why we're doing podcasting in general, why we think that this is a good platform or forum for us to share who we are as a company and what we think that it can do for you as a client or as a business owner. We've talked about, we did a deep dive into who we are as people and our experience in life. And then we talked a little bit about why we started illumisoft and how we got to this point. And I think the last thing that we wanted to cover in this podcast is a little bit about our business philosophy and why we approach business the way we do and what that approach is. So, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think our philosophy is? Because I've tried to share that with you over a number of months. And as I explained earlier, I'm not the best communicator unless I can sit and dig into it for a long time. So help us.
Well, yeah, I think that, one of the things that one of the first things that I started to do when I first came on board was, is that I saw that we had a lot of projects, and I saw that everybody was engaged, and they were actively, working hard every day, and we were busy and everything. But the thing that struck me, and this was based on my previous experience at RSI, and I don't know, I couldn't figure out what the difference was, but there didn't seem to be this core belief among everybody that was working at illumisoft at the time, like what we collectively stood for, right? Like, you could ask a developer why they were doing what they were doing. Why are you here? Right? Why are you at the company? And they were like, get a paycheck and, move on, right? And then you talk to another developer and they would say, it's the work. It's the type of work that you guys do, the variety of the work that you do. But when you collected all that feedback from them, there wasn't a common theme. And so what I started to do was kind of create these values and really they all came from my conversations with everybody, right? I was just writing them down, and then I was saying, well, this thing is common to what that person said was what they value. And then I think I kind of looked at you and then Dustin at the time and just said, do they represent what they've hired, right, in terms of the people? And so one of the things that I came to understand, having listened to you and enough people in the industry, was the one area that we could all in this industry get much, much better at was being customer focused or customer centric, right? Is the idea of client service really was a missing component that we really need. We need to spend as much energy and knowledge educating ourselves about new technology as we do getting smarter about how we deliver better service, right?
I think you meant just the opposite of that. Yeah, we need to deliver customer service with the same fervor that we explore technology. I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think necessarily it was missing. It was just we hadn't gotten to the point, and I don't think we're still at the point where we can do it where we meet our own expectations.
Right. Yeah. In my estimation, is to draw the comparison of customer service to being a developer and understanding technology. Most people that are good developers, as you've explained to me, they don't ever feel that they're what they need to learn that it ever ends. That they're constantly, it's a journey that they're on to continue to learn and understand new technologies and the way we could use that to deliver something for a client. And all I'm saying is I see the journey the same way with client service, which is always figuring out better ways to continue to get better at how we deliver our service, right? So that's one big one for me in terms of philosophy. And quite frankly, it is the way that you distinguish, yourself from other companies. And the second, the one that we've already talked about a little bit is just communication, right? Part of a good service to anybody is being able to communicate your value and what you're delivering. And that, not that our business is particularly or uniquely situated that we have to be better at communication than other industries, but when you take a highly technical service and deliver it potentially to non-technical people, you better be good at the in-between, which is the communication part, right?
Right.
And I think I worked with you long enough to know that you figure out a way to kind of break that down and to people and make it understandable so they do understand what value they're getting. And I think this ties in a little bit more to client services, but it also is, again, one of the biggest critiques of our industry, which is this idea of a partnership versus being a vendor, right? Oftentimes enough, people, and maybe this again goes to their lack of education, is they just think that we're a contractor like you would hire for building a house, right? I'm going to go pay this person to go do this job. They go do it. And then we part our ways and we shall never meet again, right? I think and some companies are fine with that kind of a relationship, but I think that one way that we're trying to build the business to be a little bit unique is to say, we're trying to invest in the relationship at the very beginning to build trust so that we know that we can go from trust to being a partner for a long period of time, right?
Right.
We're not a transactional company, right?
Well, and we don't, if we do a project with somebody and we get through it, and people don't walk away from that experience feeling good about it, then it's a failure, in my opinion. Because we rely on people feeling good about having worked with us. And so some people just don't want to feel good about it. Some people want to see you as a vendor and look, I'll pay you, you give me what you want, and that's it. I don't, that is a really hard relationship to have with somebody who you have to deliver software to. because without that back and forth, you can never be assured you're delivering them what they need.
All right.
So
yeah. So and like I said, I mean, the goal of the podcast, as we've said, is to get to know us and get to know the way we do business. And I think the easiest way for you to understand that is to understand not only how you built the business, but how going forward, how every interaction that you have with your potential partners or customers, what you can expect from them in terms of, the values they have, whether they're
right.
focused on you as the client, or they more focused on internally looking inward, versus externally to the client. Being able to communicate, being collaborative. I think those are all things that, we want to be good at, and we want to continue to get better at.
Right. And I hold us to a very high standard because I have high expectations. So you and I recently have started reaching out to companies to do some lead generation and marketing work for us. And I have found through that process of interviewing them and deciding who it is that we want to work with, just how much of my decision is based on whether or not I trust that they will deliver on customer service. Right. It's not what they do that I question so much, because I really can't, I'm not an expert on that. But what I do know is if they're doing it successfully or doing it failure-wise, it doesn't make a difference to me if they can't communicate. Right. That's probably not said the right way, but
no, I understand that.
Yeah. The communication and customer service and having your focus as a vendor on that customer is required to have the kind of relationship that I want to have with my customers, and to have the kind of relationship that I want to have with my vendors.
Well, and honestly, Dan, it's written into the ether, kind of in a way, of our company, because whenever we have a client sign a statement of work for us to begin work, it says it in terms, but I can't explain exactly, but what implicit in it is, it says, we're in this relationship as a partner, and we hope you view us the same way, right? You have responsibilities in the relationship, and we have responsibilities in the relationship.
Exactly. It's harder to do at bigger companies sometimes, unless you can force them to identify one or more people that you can partner with and that are responsible for the project on their side. Larger companies it's easy to make the responsibility so diverse, so distributed, that our job becomes a lot more difficult, because we have to herd the cats into a common direction before we can actually get the answers and take the direction and move in the direction that we need to go.
Well, and one of the things that I know we're kind of getting to the point where we want to talk about kind of next episode in terms of what we want to talk about and what people can kind of expect. And, I think, I know you're an avid reader or listener to audiobooks. And I don't.
I call that reading.
Right. But I am too, in terms of just, different, business books and things like that. And I like to read a lot of biographies too, mainly business people. But one of the books that I love, and the story that I love, is Tony Hsieh. He runs Zappos.
Oh yeah.
Right. The shoe company. One of my favorite stories is that, so there's a woman who's in customer service at Zappos, and she picks up the call, and the woman says, I want to return my shoes. And they have like this, you can return shoes anytime you want kind of policy. And so she says, yeah, here's the process to follow to return the shoes and all that. So the customer service rep thinks that the woman's done, and that's that. And the woman just begins to kind of open up to her about, having a really tough day because of this thing's going on in my life. So this woman, the customer service rep, in most poorly run companies would say, well, that's great. Gotta go.
Sorry, click.
Right. So this customer service rep for Zappos just like literally says, okay, well, I'm going to engage. And so, and this has been a few years ago now, but this woman stayed on the phone with this lady for 8 hours.
Wow.
And the transaction was finished within the first 10 minutes, right? And so this woman went on to talk about all this, and so finally in the call, and somebody said later after they were reviewing the call, said, that was like a company record of, and they were interviewing the woman in a book or an article or something. So why did you do that? And she goes, because it was the right thing to do. She was obviously having a bad day and needed somebody to talk to. And she's like, and so, the byproduct of that was this woman is now probably a customer for life.
Right. But so if you're Tony Hsieh, you've got to ask yourself, I just paid her for 8 hours worth of work. Is there any value in that? And most people would probably say, no, I'm not paying you to be somebody's counselor or to,
right.
But is there value in it? I mean, let's talk about that, because it seems to me like if that girl got interviewed, she feels really good about being a good person and she did the right thing. And right. Zappos is getting all kinds of, or any amount of publicity, positive right. publicity. I mean, it's well worth it.
Sure.
It's hard to see, a little bit abstract, but definitely worth it.
And what and what a lot of small business owners know is that I can pull up a P&L statement and look at my numbers and look at the raw metrics of running my business, and nowhere in there is that going to show up. Right. And so anyway, my point was, if we're talking about future podcast episodes, is I do think focused on talking about some of the books that we read and how that affects the way we think of illumisoft. And I also think having an episode dedicated to customer service and how we try to deliver the best that we can, and then maybe some things that we're learning or trying to maybe implement might be another good topic to talk about. So.
I think those are excellent topics to talk about. I think there's just so many. We should probably get a plan together about what we want to talk about and when. However, I really want to keep this real, right? I want to keep this authentic, and I don't think you can script out authenticity.
Right.
So next week, I think we should talk about maybe some of our case studies. Let's talk about some of our clients, some of the projects that we've done, and not technically, but in the realm of communication and customer service, talk about the challenges and how we overcame them and how we grew as a company to do things better and what those things are. I would love to talk about that next week. For one, maybe get a couple of those case studies in, and then maybe in following weeks, talk about book reviews.
Right. Yeah, I think that, I think those would be good topics to talk to. And they, by virtue of talking about those projects, it will begin to kind of interweave all those concepts, right? Communication, collaboration, all those things that we talked about, what we hope makes us unique or different in some way. So.
If nothing else, Matt, it'll be a learning process for us. I would like to think that once we have fully and completely opened ourselves up and shared without a filter what we're thinking and feeling and doing in this business, that all of those things will tie together and people will see that there is a level, there is a consistency to us that is based on a foundation that is human and real and authentic and based in caring about our clients and what happens to them.
So maybe at some point, Dan, we should talk about what this podcast will never be. This will never be the Joe Rogan show. This will never be, I suppose it could be entertaining, but it might be for all the wrong reasons. But
yeah, well, we're no Joe Rogan.
Right. Anyway, so
But I am appreciative of Joe Rogan. I am appreciative of other people that are getting out and doing these real authentic long form podcasts and video interviews, because I think it helps the world. I think we need to share our real authentic selves with people so that everybody will be incentivized to do the same thing. So I truly appreciate Joe Rogan. He's kind of for me, he is the, what do you call it? He's the maverick, right? That got out there and did this. 1,600, 1,700, maybe 1,500, I don't know, somewhere around there podcasts that he's done that have changed the world, right?
Well, I know, and speaking of just podcasts, I know one of the big ones that I listen to is called Pivot, which is Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher on technology. And then I listen to Malcolm Gladwell's, and every time I walk away from any of those podcasts, I feel like I've learned something new, right? And definitely, and the other parts of it that are interesting, maybe we've been able to communicate that a little bit today, is just really good stories, right? Mm-hmm. Just good stories that people told. So,
yeah, I'm excited, Matt, to look back on these podcasts and hope that the stories and the truths that we reveal about ourselves and about our business and about, life in general as we go through this, withstand the test of time, right?
Right.
For me, looking back at these will be a good learning tool, right? To always keep aiming to be the best entrepreneur, to be the best business owner, to be the best boss, I guess. I don't know, to be the best person that is, manager of others.
Right.
And if you don't put yourself out there and then, do the introspection of that work, then and listen to other people's comments and feedback, I don't think that you can accomplish that as readily. So,
right. All right. Well, Dan, we need to get some cool intro exit music or something.
Yeah, but we can record that before and after and just add it on. So,
all
right. If you have stayed with us to this point, thank you for joining us. And join us next week when we talk about some of the case studies that we've done, some of the projects that we worked on. I'm sure that they'll be add some level of insight to your day. So, Matt, any final words?
I don't. Thanks, Dan, for getting us started. So,
all right. Have a great day.
All right. You too.